Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to Game Changers Devotional. I'm Michael Pate, and on behalf of myself and Ken Horseman and Jacob James, we are glad to have you here, and we are glad that God has saw this little small project that was started grow in the way it has, and it's making an impact the way it has, and we know that's all because of God and not because of us. But we'd like to remind you that if there's anybody you think would like to join the call, you can feel free to pass the call-in number, the dial-in number over to them, and just remind them that, we do this every Wednesday morning at about 7:30. So with that being said, I'm going to lead the devotional today, and, I wanted just to think about, how wise are you? I don't know about you, but I'm a lot wiser now than I was in my teens. I look back now, and there's probably times when I think to myself, how in the world did I live through some of this stuff? But it's just because that I lacked wisdom then, and over the years I became wiser, and I got to thinking about that, and just James 1:5 came to mind to me, and that says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. So if you go back and you look at James 1, starts out, James is talking to the 12 tribes. And he says in verse 2, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. I don't know about you, but sometimes I struggle to find joy when I'm going through tough situations. I can tell you last summer was a tough summer. And it started out at the first of the summer, and it started out, it seemed like that about every 2 weeks, something was breaking on my son's truck. And it just was become more aggravating, and I started questioning, if I was doing the right thing by repairing the vehicle, because it was $1,000 here, $750 here, $200, $100. I just really started questioning that, and it seemed like that a lot of times it was small things, but they were hard to diagnose. And so in the middle of the summer, one morning I sat at a table when I was teaching a Bible study to a group of about 10 or 12 guys, and my son happened to be there that morning, and I taught her that lesson that morning was on faith. And so I did one of those deals that, I was encouraging everybody, you got to have faith, you got to trust in God. And after the Bible study was over, I was standing around talking to some of the men. My son came in and said, Dad, when I went to crank my truck, there was a small explosion, and now it's making an awful racket. That's just what I wanted to hear. And I just taught a lesson on faith. And, I'm thinking to myself, what in the world is, what's going on? I just can't figure this out. So we had to get it towed to the shop, and like I say, my son was really questioning the whole point about, me repairing the vehicle, because he had other friends that their parents were just going out and buying them new vehicles. And that just was not in the wheelhouse of what I was going to do, and he knew that. But I remember coming home that morning, I remember sitting at my desk, and I remember having my face in my hands, and I remember sitting there, and I was weeping. I can remember the tears running down my forearms and dripping onto my desk. And I just remember saying, God, what are you trying to teach me? How can I have joy in this situation? But that conversation with God quickly turned around, and I said, God, I know you're in control of this. Do what you have to, and we'll get through this. And I can tell you now that as I look back on that situation, I can see there's some things that I wouldn't have learned if it hadn't been for that rough period we'd gone through. Now I'll tell you now, the truck still has an occasional mechanical problem, but I know that God has this, and so we have to realize that it's hard to have joy in those situations, but even at that, if we can, it makes a huge difference. In verse 4 it says, let perseverance finish its work so that she may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So patience. I remember when, I think it was in 2011, 2012, I interviewed for the position I currently have. Felt that first interview was absolutely, I felt like that I had knocked it out of the park. I just felt like, man, this is the best interview I've ever had. But I didn't get the job. And man, I just said, God, what is, why didn't I get the job? I was questioning that. And but 6 months later, I got to interview for the same position and got that job. And I can't tell you to this day exactly why things worked out the way they did, but I can tell you if they hadn't have worked out the way they did, that I wouldn't have been put around some people that have made a huge difference in my life. And, so we have to remember that, when something like that's going on, we have to have patience. God is working everything out. And back to verse 5, it says, any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and will be given to you. And I came across a story about a pastor. His name's Warren Wiersbe, and he's an author. And he tells a story about his secretary, and that she was going through some difficult times. And she had had a stroke. Her husband had gone blind. And then he had been taken to the hospital, and as far as everyone knew, he was probably going to die. And so Pastor Wiersbe saw this woman at church one Sunday, and he walked up to her, and he just said, look, I want to assure you that I'm praying for you. And so she started out and asked him a question, what are you asking God to do for me? He replied, I'm asking God to help you and strengthen you. She said, I appreciate that. And this caught him off guard. She said, but pray about one more thing. Pray that I'll have the wisdom not to waste all of this. And he said then and there she knew the true meaning of James 1:5. And we follow up with verse 6. It says, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. I think there's some steps that we could take to becoming wise. And the first thing I think we have to do is we have to pray for help for discernment of what's going on. Pray that God gives you courage and keeps you with a positive attitude. Pray that God puts people in your life that will speak the truth to you and remind you of the positive things that you have going on. And and I'm thankful to have friends like that. Last week I was a little aggravated about something, and then one of my good Christian buddies just said, hey, man, well, these are the things, and he started just listening out the things, and when he got through telling me the things that were positive, I felt really bad about feeling any negativity at all about a whole situation. But it's good to have people around you, and you pray for help, and people to help you discern what's going on. And the second thing is that I think you have to pray for guidance. Have you made some bad decisions that put you in a place where you're at today? Is that something that you need to pray about, getting guidance to work your way out of that and asking God to help you find that path? That's what he wants you to do. And then the third thing is I think that you just cast your cares on the Lord. It says in 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7, it says, therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. In the middle of the storm, sometimes you may have some doubt and say, God, if you really care for me, why am I going through this? But you have to remember that you're going through that situation, that storm, for a certain reason a lot of times. And you don't always know what that is, but one day you will. And I think that pray for faith and patience is the last thing I think. I'm personally somebody that likes to fix things. With my family, if there's a problem, I want to fix it. If my wife, tells me this, I need you to do this, I want to do it, and I want to fix it. I want to take care of my daughter. I want to take care of my son. I want everything to be fine. But that's not always how things work out. One of the hardest lessons that I had to learn in life was when my wife and I were trying to have kids, and we were going through some infertility issues. There were so many Sundays, I can tell you, that we left from church, and my wife was crying because it seemed like that our Sunday school class, our life group class, it was just the fertility was rampant for everybody except us. And when somebody would announce that they were pregnant, we would get in the car going home, and she would be crying, and as a guy, what do you there's not anything I can do to make that better. We were happy that those people were expecting, but we were kind of questioning, okay, God, why are we going through this? And for a long time, I had no idea why that we were going through that. And we ended up I've got a 19-year-old, 20-year-old son. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. And I've really, those times back then are not as painful now, because there's countless times that I've been called by a pastor saying, hey, can you talk to this gentleman? He and his wife are going through infertility issues. And just being able to say, man, I understand what you're talking about, because it's just something that by me going through it, I can relate to those people. There's been people that have crossed my path that I had no idea that they were going through those issues, and then God just opened that person up to me, and I was able to share with them. So, have patience and faith and know that God's going to use that. It's been said before that you're either entering a storm, you're in the middle of a storm, or you're exiting a storm. I don't know where you are today, but I challenge you, this is my challenge for you today, is to put your faith in God and don't waver from it. Just kind of rewording James 1:5, Michael Pate, if you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. And I think we have to remember that. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the day. And I don't know what portion of the storm somebody's in. If they're going into a storm, they're in the middle of it, or they're coming out on the other side, dear God. But I just pray that you would help us to learn to have wisdom, to have faith in you, to realize that we can call upon you, and you can help us through these tough times, dear God. I just pray that if there's, the doubt that is out there sometimes, dear God, I know I have it. I know I question why things are happening, but I just lift, everybody on this call up to you, and just pray that you would give them comfort and peace about where they're at right now. And you would start letting them know why they're going through what they're going through, dear God, why that this is happening to them, dear God. And I just pray that when you give them that comfort, they can take a deep breath and they can relax, and some of that stress will be removed, dear God. I just pray that you would keep everyone safe on our call, dear God. As people travel and they're out there, and COVID-19 is seeming to ramp up again, keep them safe. Have your protection on them, dear God. And we ask these things in your name. Amen.